Tens of thousands of Iraqis took to the streets this month to demand jobs, basic services, and an end to corruption. Security forces shot and killed at least 100 of them. I'm Femi Okay.
I'm Malika Bilal, and you're in the stream. Join us with your thoughts on Twitter or in our live YouTube chat.
Iraqi's government has launched an investigation into why peaceful protests turned deadly last week. Officials have also begun offering compensation to victims' families, although some of them are refusing the money. The streets are quiet for now, but anger at the government continues to simmer.
Al Jazeera's Imran Khan, who has been covering this story, is with us from Baghdad. Welcome, Imran. You have been in Iraq for the duration of these deadly protests, and now an investigation is being called for into the deaths. I want to reference this article on aljazeera.com. Iraq's Abdel Mahdi orders inquiry into protester deaths. That's the prime minister. Online, though, people are still skeptical. This is Hamzouz, who says, how do you create an investigative committee headed by a party who was the first accused in prosecution of the demonstrators and still monitoring their digital activity till this moment? Many activists outside provinces of demonstration are threatened with arrest and disappearance. So, Imran, what do people believe will come of this investigation?
Well, there's not a huge amount of hope that the investigation will actually target any of the people responsible. What we're hearing is that the Iraqi army was responsible for most of the live fire onto the crowds. They were actually taken away from, for example, Sadr City here in Baghdad and replaced with federal police forces. But charging the army is going to be very politically difficult for the Prime Minister, Adel Abdel Mahdi. And so bringing these people to justice may well be a very difficult thing. But he's under a tremendous amount of pressure by this. The most senior religious cleric, a Shia Muslim religious cleric in the country, Grand Ayatollah Ali Sistani, actually gave him a 2-week deadline and said this investigation must take place within 2 weeks. And some of the protesters I've been speaking to say, well, that's a great deadline for us. We'll give him the 2 weeks. But if he doesn't come up with a credible investigation where the results are plain and clear for everybody to see, we'll be back out in the streets again. So there's a lot of pressure here on the government, and it's building very, very slowly. Not only do we have the senior Muslim cleric, Ayatollah Ali Sistani, but we also have 3 major political blocs in Iraq calling for new elections. We have the Speaker of the Parliament, Mohammed al-Halbousi, also talking about not elections, but certainly putting the pressure on the government.
Imran, before we start our discussion, there's something that I wanted to check in with you about, and that is we have seen protests in Iraq before. What characterizes these latest protests?
Well, for the first time, I and many of the journalists that I speak to and many of the political analysts I'm speaking to say that these protests are different because they were leaderless. They seemingly came out of nowhere, and they were a spontaneous reaction from a lot of young people who don't remember Saddam Hussein, who barely remember the invasion and occupation by the US of Iraq, who actually, and when you speak to them, they'll tell you bluntly, what they do remember is government corruption, not having any opportunities, lack of jobs, education. And even those people who are lucky enough to go and get their education, they say, well, what's the point? We have all these degrees, but there's no jobs for us to get. So this is a generation who has seen Iraq not develop since the US-led invasion and occupation. Now, it is a very difficult task to rebuild a country after something like that happens to it. But some $450 billion, according to Transparency International, has been stolen from the country. And these young people are asking questions like, well, where's that money gone? And these are valid questions to ask, I think.
We have a young person on the show who will be asking exactly that question. But for now, Imran Khan from Al Jazeera's Baghdad Bureau, we really appreciate you joining us. And now, to discuss the protests, we have Hiwa Osman. He is a journalist and analyst speaking to us from Iraq.
We also have Russia, an eyewitness to the protests. She joins us from Baghdad by phone. Russia has asked that we not disclose her last name out of concern for her safety.
And finally, in the studio today, we have Kadim Al-Wayhi. He is a political analyst and expert on Iraqi politics and culture. Welcome, it is good to have you here. So this idea about the protest, Kadim, when you saw them happening this latest time, we've reported on protests many, many, many times. Behind these protests is what?
Well, thanks for having me here. As Amran said, it's very unique, this protest, leaderless. It doesn't have a leader. When they went on the street a week ago, they went there with very simple demands for basic services, for a job and some other issues. But right now it's escalated to changing the governmental system and even the political laws, which covers the election laws. And it's getting bigger, it's getting really dangerous, actually, to the governmental environment in Baghdad right now. I mean, all the heads of the state, which is the three of them, Mr. Halbousi, the Speaker of the House, and the Prime Minister, Mr. Abdel Mahdi, and Dr. Burham Saleh, they're sitting there and they're just like, really, I mean, they're rolling their eyes when they see these people like, what do you exactly want from me? Those kids, I call them kids because they're too young, you know, and God bless them. They're on the street. They want to change everything right now. This is not just about a job, because we know the Iraqi government cannot employ everyone on the street. But the Iraqi government can bring big companies for investment. When you have a big company in Iraq, when you have a hotel or a huge company, and you can bring these young men and women to have a decent job. You don't have to rely on the government 100% for a job. But there are many issues right now. Those young men and women on the street are bringing to the government, hey, we don't want you there. We don't want the system in general. Not the democratic system, but we're talking about the election.
Think this is about. If I just add one word to this, I think being on the street and talking to the various protesters, again, I agree they're very young, but I think the operative word here is good governance. The people who were on the street, all the various demands that they were having can all be summarized in two words: good governance. The lack of good governance since 2003 is really what created this protest today. The demands that we've been hearing, we have been hearing them since 2003, but and they were in various stages of protests in Iraq over the past years, over the past 16 years. They were sidelines, they were dealt with various political groups, but at the same time they were really not met, the various protests. So the demands of the various protests in the past. So this time round, I think it's all the demands exploded on one day, October 1st, and this is a key thing. Unfortunately, what I see that the government is completely oblivious to this day to all these demands, and they are trying to throw money at problems. And this is what's not. This is, I think, what will keep these protests going. The various young people who are on the streets are seriously on the streets to call for these serious changes to the political system, but at the same time they were met with violence, they were met with cutting the internet, they were met with curfew, and that contributed to increasing and spreading the protests, at least all around the capital in the first couple of days, and then it moved to the rest of the country.
Hiwa, I'm glad you gave us that context there, because I want to bring up two tweets that I'll give to you, Rasha. Yusuf on Twitter says, demonstrations are not new to Iraq's streets, nor politicians are new to publishing promises. Since 2011, where Iraq's former Prime Minister Nouri al-Maliki promised land and houses for some Iraqis and some monthly grants for unemployed people, Iraq, though, still lacks jobs, houses, and security. But like you were saying, Qadim, people are demonstrating not just for money. They've had enough of corruption, not only for having good electricity, they want to see their homeland in a good state of development. So, Rasha, I know that you were out there on the streets. It looks like we just lost Rasha's connection. So I'll give this back to you, Hiwa, because I know you were there on the second day of the protests when live fire broke out. Tell us about that. And did that surprise you?
It was actually very surprising. I went from the Batawin area of Baghdad to see the end of the protest, and because they were pushed back from Tahrir Square to another area called Saht al-Tayaran. the Tehran Square. Close to it, the people, the young guys, were hit with the tear gas, they shot some live rounds at them. And I started to asking people, and in the middle of the interview, I posted that video on my Facebook page, and I think, and in the middle of the interview, all we saw, the people were standing. They were not even shouting slogans or anything. They were getting ready actually to disperse. And we saw tear gas being thrown at us, and then at the same time we saw live rounds coming from the forces. I'm not sure if it was the
do you
army.
mind if I show some of it? Because you follow you on Facebook, if we follow you on Twitter, and you have been documenting this, and you've been documenting this for a reason. So let me show people what you posted. This was on October the 6th, and then you can talk through what we're actually seeing. Let me just press play there.
This is behind Tahrir Square.
See, this is exactly where we were.
The demonstrators are pushed back to this area with tear gas.
See, they're not doing anything. If you look at this video,
volunteers are bringing water.
And then in the second video on my Facebook page,
So let me just see that. So you're just saying they're not really doing anything. They're just there in the streets. So let me go to this video, which is so disturbing. I am just going to show you here. This is a protester's video, army shooting. And I'm just going to press play down here and then pull it back up, and you'll hear this. Let's pull the audio right up, guys.
See, he's shooting horizontal. Can you notice? The shots are horizontal. They're not firing in the sky. And this was really amazing. We don't know why they were doing this.
And the reason you mentioned he's shooting horizontal is because the
people were on the street.
Yeah, and there were suggestions that the shooters were snipers, which would be coming from higher up, not from down on the streets.
There were two types of bullets coming. Some came from at the horizontal. I went to the hospitals and I met some of the injured, and they were injured from both sides. Some of them were army, and others were from the protesters. Some of the people in the army accused the riot police, and this was really amazing. The riot police are supposed to be the most patient, the most calm, the most cool-headed, but they were the most trigger-happy. And one of them said, I had to not to publish these videos because of the identity of the wounded. They were going to be. Most of them had gunshots coming in from one side and coming out of the other side in a horizontal way in their body part, in their bodies. So it shows that it explains where the bullets of that military person, of that soldier, ended up. He was firing in a horizontal fashion.
Thank you for that. I'm going to bring Malika back in the conversation. Malika, go ahead.
I want to play a video comment we got from a political activist in Istanbul on this. This is Ahmed, and here's what he told the stream.
Possible the protests
are spontaneous and without a political leadership, and that was advantage for the protesters. At this point, I am not sure Iraqi government administration can stop this because it's separated, became in 11 provinces out of 18 total. All the Iraqi people are asking the international community and every human rights organizations to condemn what are going on in Baghdad. Because that's not what we're willing to be, and that's the future we're asking for. Personally, I'm not sure about the ability of Iraqi government to solve the problem and making a better choice for the protesters.
Rasha, I want to bring you back into the conversation. Ahmed in his video comment says he's not sure of the government's ability to solve this problem. You went to the protests as a witness. You talked to protesters. What were they telling you?
Well, there's a number of things that protesters have said. They're not exactly the same, but the most common one was the fact that they believe the government should have seen these protests coming since they happened in 2011, 2013, 2015, 2016, 2017, 2018, and now in 2019. They have absolutely no faith whatsoever that the government can do anything whatsoever, and this can be seen from the fact that when the protests actually first began, they were demanding a lack of corruption, increased employment opportunities, an improvement on the lack of basic services. But once the hostility and the live ammunition and the use of snipers against protesters' demands was justice for those that have died, had been wounded, had been taken. Some people have no idea what has happened to some of their friends or their family members. And then in the end, a complete lack of faith in the government whatsoever. So I guess the demands of the protesters transition based on the escalation of hostility by both sides, not just from the government, but also by protesters themselves. For example, you'd have protesters attacking fire trucks or ambulances because fire trucks were then actually used against protesters. There became a lack of faith between protesters, even among themselves, because you'd find people dressed in civilian clothing and suddenly attacking them and taking them away. So I guess what once started off as just normal demonstrations for, I guess, what they've always been demonstrating for over the last few years, transitioned to, a complete lack of faith in the current political government, parties, and also the system itself.
Kadim, I want to play you a soundbite from the spokesperson of Grand Ayatollah al-Sistani. His reaction. He is a very powerful cleric in Iraq. Let's listen to his reaction. Then, Kadim, I want you to come off the back of him. Go ahead, let's play.
The Iraqi government and its security authorities are fully responsible for the blood which has been shed in the demonstrations of the past few days. The bloodshed was either from the innocent residents or from security elements which were entrusted with dealing with them. The government is no longer able to shy away from bearing such a big responsibility.
A cleric making a declaration about the politics of what's going on in Iraq right now. How significant is that?
Well, Shia clerics, they always get involved into politics. I mean, some of them in the parliament, some of them actually they're active in the government. So the mix between religion and politics these days, it became fashion. But it's good that the Marja'iyya, represented by Grand Ayatollah Ali Sistani, and Sheikh Abdul Hadi al-Karbala'i, who led the Friday sermon in Karbala, they're condemning those attacks against the civilian, which is really good. That's giving legitimacy to the protester and to the protest. But he's relying on the problem. We need the solution. The solution comes actually from the government, but not interim solutions, not just throwing money, not just apologizing or anything. No, you have to really have a major surgery to change the Iraqi political system. And that's with the protester right now. They're looking for some good solution, not just every time. This is since 2011, since 2010. Every time they have a protest, and the Iraqi government promised them to have a job for them. But this time, there's a chaos also within the ISF, the Iraqi security forces. Who's doing what? Who's shooting at this innocent protester? Is it the army? Is it the police? Is it the militias? Is it the PMF? So
the key problem with this, I'm sorry to intervene, is that we have a very weak government. We have a very weak political process. A process that is led by the clergy on one hand. They are very much respected. They've been very wise in some of their interventions. The news of their ultimatum for the government was very good. But on the other hand, politically, nobody seems to be in charge in Iraq. The most powerful man today in Iraq is Mr. Qasem Soleimani, the IRCG, the Iranian IRCG commander, who comes to Iraq, orders people around, and it seems from what we've been hearing from some government sources that the Iranians have taken charge of the process of crushing what's happening now. And the same way as the Green Revolution in Iran was crushed, the same tactics are being used today against the Iraqi protesters.
You and I, thank you. You and I, we know Iraqi government, it's a consensual government. And in the Middle East, when you have a consensual government, that means it's going to be weak, which means going to be run. Yeah, it's going to be run by various political parties. And the head of the state is not really the head of the state. The prime minister, he's actually compromised. He's not even elected. Mr. Adel Abdel Mahdi, he was a compromise figure. They picked him up from the...
And hence the big vacuum created, the big power vacuum created, the big political vacuum created is being filled by Iran and its agents. And its proxies in the area.
Consensual government never worked in the Middle East. Even in the Muslim or Arab world, we have one in Pakistan, consensual government, in Iraq, consensual government, back in the days in Yemen, consensual government, in Lebanon, consensual government. They
Gentlemen,
always failed.
I hear you both. I do not hear Rasha. Rasha, you're trying to get in. Go ahead.
Yeah. I just want to say that I completely agree with, I think it was what he was said, that at least Iraqis view that the Iranians have taken complete control of the government. Actually, when I was on ground, protesters were actually complaining that they feared the lack of American intervention and the increase of Iranian intervention in the country. This is actually a big fear among protesters, whether the fact that they're young or not doesn't matter. They're actually saying this on ground. They actually believe
after what
that
we are seeing in Syria, after what we are seeing in Syria, no Iraqi really trusts the American anymore. And they are hoping that really Iran looks at Iraq as a real partner.
This is not true. I'm on ground. I'm speaking to people every single day, even people who are not at protest. People, for example, who work for applications like Kareem or Zain or have small startups. All of these people are also speaking, not just people who are protesting. All of these people are they actually fear a lack of American intervention in all of this.
Exactly, that's what I'm saying. That's exactly what I'm saying. America is watching as an officious bystander. All of this is happening.
It's them if you do, them if you don't. If they interfere, get death to America. If they not, America neglected us. And so it's them if you do, them if you don't. And that's the good thing, that America is staying away from this chaotic issue.
All right, guests, thank you for that. Hold tight for a moment. I just want to get back to the community via Malika.
Pushing forward on what is going to happen next, there is conjecture from Faris here on Twitter who says, we're calling for the resignation of the government of Mr. Adel Abdel Mahdi, can transfer it to a caretaker government, change the electoral law in such a way in order to end the continuous domination of grand parties over the results. Qadim, calling for the resignation of the prime minister, do you think that that is something that's bigger than just this one person here, and do you think it's feasible?
It's not feasible. It's a bigger thing. I mean, Adel Abdel Mahdi is one person. You get rid of him. It's a name and one person. You get rid of him. You remove him. Those grand political parties and Islamic parties and, well, they are just Islamists, and they're going to bring their own stooge again. They will bring their own mini-me. So you have Dr. Evil right there watching the mini-me doing the dirty business. And so it's the resignation of Adel Abdel Mahdi is not really the solution. The solution is these political parties,
that's right,
the heads of the political parties who run in Iraq since 2003.
And exactly this is why the protesters are asking for constitutional reform, and they're asking for changing the formula that is being repeated. We have been trying the same thing over and over again since 2003 and expecting a different result, and this is clearly not working.
Let me just go back to Rasha. Rasha, I'm going to show on my computer some of the key reasons why people were out on the streets this last time in October. So we have a population of 40 million in Iraq, 60% are youth, 20% are unemployed, and in the Transparency International League of Corruption, Iraq comes in at number 168, which is not a good showing. If you could ask and push and you really tapped into what those protesters wanted, what would it be out of these most recent protests? What would it be? What would they want? What would they settle for? All right, we've just lost her, which also speaks to the point of it's very difficult to connect. Hiwa, we're right at the end of the show, so I was just going to get a quick wrap-up thought there from Rasha. Rasha, sorry that we lost you there. But it's also very difficult connectivity in Iraq right now because of the protests, and it's spotty, which is why we were having difficulty there with Rasha. Malika.
And of course, the government crackdown on the internet, which is what we got a lot of tweets about. But some people managed to tweet us, so I want to end with this from Mustafa, who says the protests that shook Iraq are winding down, but younger Iraqis remain determined, and the generation gap that's developing will have an impact for years to come.
Thank you to Imran, Hiwa, Rasha and Kadim for joining us on our show today. Malika and I will see you next time online at AJ Stream. Thanks for watching.